Hi, I'm Emmy Lou Allen, and I wrote my paper on how to get people involved in global warming. Everyone needs to be involved in global warming because it is destroying the earth and it is the only one that we have. In order to reduce global warming, we need to bring down carbon emissions by 80% by 2020. I am going to list the reasons of why we need to get people involved in reducing carbon emissions. I'm also going to give examples on what they can do to reduce carbon emissions. Global warming is causing the earth to heat up. It's not only heating up the earth, it's causing things to happen. Global warming is greenhouse gases that are in the atmosphere. Greenhouse gases occur naturally. Before the Industrial Revolution, we were able to balance the carbon emissions with trees taking in that carbon every spring and summer. But when the industrial age started, we started using more fossil fuels to fuel cars, trucks, and planes. And that adds to the natural greenhouse gases, and it's created a very warm blanket on the earth. Now we need those greenhouse gases to live on earth because it keeps it at a temperature that's warm enough for us to live here. But now we've created so many of them, and it takes years for those to come out of the atmosphere, or they can stay in the atmosphere for centuries, that it's just compiling to where it's getting too warm. So the question is, we know that people are causing global warming, so why haven't we done anything about it? I have three reasons why we haven't done anything. There's politics, finances, and ignorance. The first I'm going to explain is politics. In order for something to be done in a nationwide, wide scale, it has to be passed through Congress, and most of the times they don't get passed because everyone has to agree on it, and that doesn't always happen. So a lot of bills haven't been passed about the global warming. The last one that was passed was in 1990, the Clean Air Act. It requires each state and each company to put fines on companies that put pollutions into the air. It makes them regulate, what is being put out there. They have to make sure they're constantly looking at each company to make sure that their pollution is within reason. Also, they're working on a cap and trade agreement. And according to Wall Street Journal in March of 2009, cap agreement is a way for the government to look like they're taxing companies for pollution, but really it's coming out of the workers' pockets. And the people who are going to be hardest hit is the 95% of working families, which can't afford to have more taxes the way it is because of the economy. And the second biggest aspect stopping people from being involved in stopping global warming is finances. It all comes down to money. People don't have the cash flow because more taxes and everything, higher food costs, higher gas costs. They don't have the money to buy green. Like, for instance, if you wanted to use solar panels and have those put on your house to help with electricity cost, the upfront cost is so high. But in the end, you'd be saving money, and it would pay off the cost of those solar panels over time. For instance, the cost to have a solar panels is anywhere from $100 to $1,300, depending on how many kilowatts you want. And you have to look at your monthly bill to figure out how many kilowatts you use, and then go from there. If you wanted to have a windmill, they can range from $500 to $1,000. It all depends, again, on kilowatts. If you have solar and windmill, you wouldn't need the biggest windmill, and it all depends on installation cost too. If you have a small enough wind turbine, you usually can install it yourself, and there's tons of videos online that gives you that option to do that. But if you had a really big wind turbine, it can cost up to $60,000 to have that installed, which you usually need to because they're so big. Another thing would be a geothermal heat pump. If you wanted to have that put in, those can be approximately, for a 1,700 square foot home, be at about $26,000. But you would get that money back in about 8 years in savings of over time on heating and cooling costs. And you can also finance it for the same amount that you're paying right now anyways. So it actually works out because you're using the heat from the ground. You're not using oil and stuff like the fossil fuels that we need to stop using so much of. It also adds to your home's value, so that's also a plus. They have tax credits for solar, wind turbines, and geothermal. That's like a 30% tax credit, and it's up to $2,000 a year, which you can carry over to the next years until you get that full amount. There's also rebates on windows, energy efficient appliances like water heaters, dishwashers, refrigerators, freezers. If you go to EnergyStar.gov, you can type in your zip code and it'll give a list of each electric company and what they offer for rebates. And not all electric companies are offering rebates right now. So I think you just have to keep checking back to see if your electric company was offering those, because if it's, for instance, ours is Freeborn Mower, and Austin is the one that is giving out rebates, so we can't do it because it's not our electric company. The reason that green things are so expensive, or for us are so expensive, is because they're expensive to make, because it's the supply and demand. There isn't a whole lot of demand yet out there for them, and so it makes it harder to get that stuff to make them. And then the third biggest issue with people not being involved in global warming is ignorance. There's a lot of people that say, I can't see it, so it's not happening. They don't think it's in their backyard, but it is. The biggest thing that most people see when they think about global warming is the glaciers in Antarctica that are breaking up at an astonishing rate. We don't see that because we don't live there, but you can see it all over on the internet, and it is hard for people to understand because we don't live there and we don't see it on a daily basis, but it's something that's happening, and it's something that we need to hurry up and stop, and that reducing carbon emissions will help that. If the Antarctic ice shelf starts to break, which it already has in 2002, the Larsen ice shelf had a huge break off. If more breaks off, it could eventually lead the sea level to rise, and on coastal cities such as Los Angeles, like right on the coast, that could be devastating for those people who live on in a coastal city, because it'll flood them. They won't have anywhere to live, and they'll have to go in further, where people will probably already be strapped for food and water. So that's another reason why this needs to happen now, because if it keeps breaking off like it is in bigger chunks, the sea level will rise. Some information I found at blog.sustainablog.org. They gave some numbers on how many people recycle and how much trash that the United States has. There's 251 million tons of trash in the United States, and only 82 million tons of materials are recycled, which narrows down to 4.6 pounds per person of trash, and only 1.5 pounds is recycled. So there's a big gap that could be, added to. a lot of reasons why people don't recycle is because it's inconvenient, but it's one of the easiest things that we can do to help reduce carbon emissions. I think the way that would help people to understand how to recycle too is to educate more people. Maybe start in school when kids are young, give them, you know, a sheet of paper, and then they can bring that home to their parents, and their parents can read that and understand what can be recycled, what can't be recycled. And it's just so easy that it just needs to be done. So, you know, like Lester Brown says, everyone needs to be an environmentalist, and that's one of the things that you can do to be an environmentalist is recycle. And he wants everything recycled, but even just to start with, newspapers, magazines, pop bottles, aluminum cans, you know, to recycle that stuff. And aluminum cans you can get money for. So, I mean, that's also an incentive to recycle your aluminum cans. And it also takes a big chunk out of landfills. Most people are enticed to do things because of money. Again, everything comes down to money. They would be enticed to do something if they were going to get paid for it or get save money. So again, you know, recycling, you don't get paid for certain recycling yet. Maybe at some point in time we'll be able to have a market like China. They can live off of collecting pop bottles and glass bottles because China has a market for it. And a lot of our recycling gets shipped to China. So hopefully one day we won't have to do that. We can save on exporting costs. So one of the requirements for an LEED certification, which is what a lot of businesses and home owners are going to, it's a green certification. One of the certification parts is you have to have an area for recycling for your pop cans, cardboard boxes, newspapers, and another one is to have recyclable materials put into your house. Like there's such things as having a recycled glass countertop, and then denim insulation, which they're both, you know, they're fairly reasonably cost compared to like if you were to get a granite countertop. So that's something that you could look into to help out the earth too. And having the insulation, which everyone needs to have, it saves you money on heat and air conditioning as well, and less toxic chemicals if you get the denim insulation. So ultimately our goal is to reduce carbon emissions. Recycling obviously will help a huge amount in reducing, and that's the easiest thing to do. And then going to electric and hybrid vehicles would be helpful in reducing carbon emissions because you don't use as much gas and there's not as much emissions from an electric or hybrid vehicle. And the other thing that would be good is, what else did I have? If more people use buses and trains, which in the rural area that's not possible because there's so much of a distance. But I think cities need to start going more towards having building trains instead of repairing roads. They need to start going to trains and maybe buses, but trains would be more logical. If everyone had energy efficient appliances, that would cut carbon emissions greatly, you know, and there's also tax incentives for that. So I think in reality, we all need to get on board because we need to cut carbon emissions by 80% by 2020. I've given you a lot of, there's tons and tons of stuff out there for you to figure out how to become more involved in saving the earth, and it needs to be done now. If we were to decrease our carbon emissions, the biodiversity would improve and our health would improve because we'd be walking more, there would be less pollution in the air, and fewer toxins in the atmosphere. So everyone needs to be an environmentalist. Even if they were to do one of the things or all the things that I mentioned, it would improve. We would get to that 80% by 2020. So they just need to do recycling. It's the easiest thing. Like I said, we all need to do something or we face dire consequences. Everyone will, not just one person, everyone.